Welcome to Introducing Little Wargame number 3. In Introducing Little Wargame number 1, we went over the main lobby UI that you see when you first start playing the game. And in number 2, we went over the UI that you see in-game as you're playing. However, for this episode, we're going to go over what all of the units are in the game of Little Wargame by default, and go briefly over what they all do. Firstly, I'm going to note, we are not going to say what all of the buildings are that these units come from. Additionally, this will not be an incredibly in-depth look at each of the units. The balance and gameplay and design of Little Wargame is changing and is constantly in flux and may change in the future. The point of this video is to introduce you to the general tendencies and capabilities of what the unit does, not whether it beats X unit and Y amount of hits. Without further ado, here's the first unit we need to talk about, the Worker. This is a unit that you're going to make quite a lot of. It is a low offensive power unit that can mine from gold mines. It also has the ability to make buildings. If you look at the command card in the bottom right, currently it can make about a dozen or so buildings between the two tabs that it has access to. Again, it has fairly low power, and the other thing that it can do is it can repair mechanical units. Next, we're going to go to the Soldier. For the Rax faction, or the Barracks faction or race, the Soldier is a somewhat slow but fairly tanky, high hit point unit that deals a good amount of single target damage. It is small, but it can be massed as a result. It fits nicely into airships, and they work well for attacking enemy lines and buildings. They're particularly useful at taking down structures, particularly if they're only fighting structures. And a lot of ranged units have to respect the Soldier and can't stay and fight them. Next is the Archer. This default ranged unit from the Barracks race, or Barracks faction if you will, has what you would expect from a default ranged unit. It has a certain amount of range, roughly range about this far. As you can see, it doesn't go too terribly far, and in exchange for that range, it has slightly lower damage. However, because of that, you can use it for kiting or distance attacks. Moving away from the Archer is the Mage. The Mage is much like a slower, slightly less powerful version of the Archer, but in exchange for that and that sick different animation for its attack, it has access to spells. By default, it has access to Slow Field. Slow Field lowers the speed of enemy units that are trapped within it by 50%, and it does not stack. It also has a Fireball, which is a point-and-click line ability. However, that ability has to be upgraded, so it will not be demonstrated here. Next, we have the Priest. The Priest is kind of the counterpart to the Mage, whereas the Mage is the Barracks faction, or just the Rax unit's equivalent of kind of a damaging spellcaster. The Priest is all about supportive spells and healing spells. By default, it comes with a healing word, so you can cast the healing word, and in the affected area, units will be healed. Simple enough. It also has an ability that you can research called Invisibility, which, as you may imagine, allows the Priest for the sum of mana to convert a unit from visible and transform it into an invisible unit. The Priest is really good as a splash of inside of an army, not really something that you want a whole ton of, but its utility can't be denied. Next is the Catapult. The first of the mechanical faction, or the mech units. The Catapult is a very long-distance ranged unit. However, it does have minimum range, and what that means is that within a certain distance it cannot attack. It needs to be a certain distance away. It additionally has the ability to fire at the ground. By using currently the Q ability, it can point at the ground and fire at that area continuously, whether or not there are enemy units in the way. This is really useful for catching retreating units, or for units where you predict their movement. As a mechanical unit, it can be repaired by workers, and it is slow, but it does have armor, and it has quite a decent amount of damage. The first of the beast units we're going to talk about is the Wolf. In contrast to the slower, sturdier Soldier, the beast unit's Wolf is quite fast. It has a low degree of regeneration, which will be on display now, and additionally, it is very, very, very fast. Even though it's not quite as strong as a worker, or is at best comparable to a worker, this fast unit allows you excellent map positioning. You couldn't ask for a better unit for scouting, and because of its quick build time, you can make a lot of them and replace losses or add numbers to your army very quickly. One of the big powerhouses of the Beast faction, this is the Dragon. As you can see, it is a flying beast unit. It does small AoE damage on its attack, which works as follows. This is really good for attacking workers or other clumped up units. Additionally, its speed and the fact that it flies means that it can be difficult for units that can attack it to fully engage into it, as the dragon has a great ability to retreat. Next unit we're going to go over is the Werewolf. What the dragon is for beast units in the sky, the Werewolf is to beast units on the ground. This unit is kind of like a super soldier. It has comparable speed, it hits like a Mack truck, and it has plenty of starting armor. So in addition to having more hit points, for comparison, it has about 1.5 to 2 times the number of hit points. But just to give you an idea of its general tankiness, and it hits very hard. One of its downsides is that it is a very expensive unit to make, and it is quite slow. However, you can get around these by having more bases than your opponent, or by using something like an airship to augment its speed. And frankly, its speed isn't all that bad. Next is the Ballista. The Ballista is a dedicated anti-air unit for the mech faction, or the mechanical faction. It has an ability called Black Powder, that you get from the Black Powder upgrade called Explosive Shot, which adds AoE or area of effect damage. In the meantime, since we don't have AoE or area of effect damage, this is how much this does to the Dragon, one of the tankier flying units in the game. That's a single shot. You can see how a couple of these are quite good, and as with all mechanical units, this can be repaired by workers. Next, we're going to go into a bit of an odd unit, the Bird. What's interesting about the Bird is that this bird doesn't really belong to any one particular faction. It has no attack, despite its quite good movement speed and aerial ability. It's mainly used for scouting. It doesn't have the ability to attack other units, either in the air or on the ground. When you absolutely 100% need access to information and you don't have that access, it can feel like a hopeless state, but just remember that you can make a bird. Next, we have one of the new basic units for the Beast faction, the Snake. The Snake has DPS, or damage per second, that is roughly comparable to an archer. However, it has much shorter range than its seeming Rax equivalent, and fewer hit points. Its compensation for doing this is that it does have much higher attack speed, meaning that it benefits better from upgrades than the archer that it is often compared to. Additionally, its speed is nothing to scoff at. Look at this, it's almost comparable to what the bird is in the air, though of course balance and game design may change that. Next we're going to go on to the Raider. This is another new addition for many people have only discovered through version 4.3 that was previously in AA4. The Raider is a Rax unit. It can be made out of the barracks and is for the barracks or Rax faction, and its damage is quite weird. Instead of having a flat amount of damage that it does to all unit types, it actually does bonus damage to units depending on whether or not they are biological or mechanical. It uses this in conjunction with its ability to teleport a short distance for the cost of roughly 25 mana at present, to do a lot of damage. It's very good in openings against enemy workers or against players that are being a little bit too greedy. It also has access to a second ability called Shroud, which allows you to stop all ranged units inside of its area of effect from being able to use their attacks. Next we have another mech unit, the Gatling Gun. This Gatling Gun is a pretty quick moving mech unit that can receive a couple of upgrades to increase its speed. But what's relevant about it is that, as with all mech units, it can be repaired. It has range, unlike the catapult, but it doesn't have minimum range. For instance, the catapult can fire at a considerable distance, as demonstrated here, and this Gatling gun has to get much closer. But once it is there, it can be in any distance inside and fire at will. It also has access to this Caltrops ability. It requires tech to unlock, but fortunately, there's one on the ground here to explain what it does. At present, the way a Caltrop works is as follows. When the Caltrop is run over by an enemy unit, the enemy unit loses either all or a hefty percentage, depending on implementation, of its current movement speed. I believe it's currently 9/10, but that's a specific that doesn't matter. The point is that the Caltrops are used for area control. Because units that run over them are made slow, it's harder for those units to dodge the catapult shots. Additionally, it's just a really good way to catch any units that may be fleeing. Next, we're going to go on to the flying unit for the mech faction, the Gyrocraft. The Gyrocraft is actually quite speedy. I mean, to put this in perspective, it is currently faster than even the Dragon. And it has a decent attack, to the point that a small group of them can easily two-shot a worker. They're really good, as are all flying units, at harassment, But particularly due to its speed and the fact that it can be mass repaired, this is a unit that you don't want to look the other way for, and you really want to make sure that you kill if it's on your opponent's side and you're engaging it. The final unit that we're going to go over is the airship. The airship belongs to the mechanical faction in that it receives mech upgrades, but there's something curious about the airship. It actually has the ability, as you might guess from its look, to carry units. It can carry units and then transport them to the other side. So notice, the benefit here is that the airship is really good for moving units that are otherwise immobile. Here, this is something that you should probably try out if you have not already done it. Catapults and airships. Notice that the catapult has a naturally fairly slow movement speed, but when put inside of an airship, all of a sudden it starts zooming about quite well. The airship can both unload and drop off units that it picks up, and it's really good for a number of things. One, harassing workers or attacking bases or otherwise ground locked off areas. And secondly, it does a pretty solid job of scouting. It can also receive upgrades that enable it, alongside the bird, to detect invisible units, such as the units that might be made invisible by yonder priest. Perhaps one of the most underrated aspects of the airship is that it has, in addition to its speed, the ability to scout and get extra information. And in fact, it's not all bad as a tank or to draw focus fire from anti-air units, although, be warned, it will die quickly. It's just that that's a small extra bit of utility that you can get from it. So there you have it. These are the units of Little Wargame, and what, without numbers overall, what they do, what role you can expect them to have in any given game that you play with them.